Now, in this video, we are going to discuss Aristotle, his political ideas after introduction to his life. And in political ideas, we will be including his thought on human nature and the state, apart from the rule of law and constitution. Before we do that, let's take a look at Aristotle's life. Aristotle lived from 384 to 322 BC. He wasn't Athenian by birth. We need to remember. Of course, he stayed a very long time in Athens, but he was non-Athenian. Unlike Plato, Aristotle was non-Athenian. So he was born in Stagira in northern Greece, but he was a Greek person. His father Nicomachus was a court physician to the king Amyntas III of Macedon. When Aristotle was a child, his father died, and he was brought up by a guardian. At the age of 17 or 18 years of age, Aristotle joined Plato's academy in Athens and remained there until the age of 37. So he spent a good deal of time in Plato's academy. After Plato's death, Aristotle left Athens, and at the request of Philip II of Macedon, he tutored Alexander the Great, beginning in 343 BC. After returning to Athens, he established the Lyceum. We know that Aristotle was a disciple of Plato. However, Aristotle differed in his politics, both in temper and content, from Plato's Republic. And we need to remember that Aristotle was a realist, and Plato was an idealist. For Aristotle, the state was the highest form of political union. It represented the pinnacle of social evolution. Aristotle tells us that a state was necessary because it provided a framework for the satisfaction of basic needs. It also ensured a means to secure and realize good life in a uniquely human sense. The state was prior to individual, not in chronological sense, but in the sense that it provided opportunities for the achievement of full humanity. For Aristotle, a state was an instrument for an individual's self-perfection. Here we need to remember that unlike social contract theorists, a state for Greek political philosopher was a natural institution, though it is treated as an instrument, but only for an individual's self-perfection. The state, according to Aristotle, evolved naturally. He applied the principle of the golden mean to his analysis of the political and social structures of the state. What is this golden mean principle? We'll be coming to that. And this application of golden mean principle is evident from his extensive research or analysis of the mixed constitutions in the politics. Aristotle attributed the decline or even the demise of a state to disproportion. Anything which is disproportionate, Aristotle tells us, may decline or even may come to an end. For Aristotle, structurally this problem was manifest in pure constitution, for it excluded some classes and interest by disenfranchisement, leading to factionalism so rampant in Greece that time. His solution was to balance the forces of exclusiveness with those of equality. So he was trying to balance the forces of what? Exclusiveness with equality, quantity with those of quality, and democratic forces with oligarchic tendency. Aristotle was categorical that a rightly constituted law was the final authority. In fact, he was a firm believer in rule of law. And that's why he's making it clear that a rightly constituted law was the final authority. Because personal authority was only desirable if, for some reason, it was not easy to codify laws to meet all general contingencies. In case there is emergency, then one may go for personal authority, but that can be exception. As a general rule, Aristotle was in favor of rule of law. For him, laws were less arbitrary and more fair, since laws are impersonal as compared to rule by a person. Aristotle writes that the rule of law is preferable to that of a single person, even if it be the better course to have individuals ruling. They should be made law guardians or ministers of laws. So, for Aristotle, there cannot be any deviation from the rule of law, even if one man is ruling. He must abide by rule of law. That's what he is telling us. Now, Aristotle contended that a free political relationship was one where the subject did not totally surrender his judgment and responsibility for both ruler, and the rule had a defined legal status. So, rule of law is consent-based rule. Here, there is a free political relationship. Subject is not completely surrendering his judgment and responsibility. Why? Because both the ruler and the ruled had defined legal status. The passionless authority of law gave to the magistrate and the subject a moral quality and dignity, Aristotle tells us. For him, a constitutional ruler, unlike a dictator, ruled over his willing subject by consent. So rule of law involves rule by consent. Aristotle goes on to tell us that the authority that was wielded by a constitutional rule over one's subject was very much different from the one that the master wielded over his slave. Remember here, Aristotle is a believer in master-slave relationship. It's a different thing that Plato altogether ignored this institution. But when it comes to Aristotle, he is a firm believer. Because for him, slave lacked reason to rule himself. Political authority for Aristotle also differed from the authority that a husband exercised over his wife and children. And here he is again critiquing Plato. He contended that a serious flaw in Plato's reasoning was his failure to distinguish between political authority and the authority of a household. And he cites here Plato's comment in the Statesman that the state was like a family writ large. Now, how the state is family writ large? Here he is trying to tell us. For Aristotle, a political relationship was decided by the authority exercised by the rulers over the ruled. Political authority also differed from the authority that has been exercised over his family, as we just made it clear. For him, political relationship was one of equality. On the contrary, an ideal state would not be constitutional or political if the differences between its members were so great that it did not have the same virtue. An ideal state is an association of equals. It cannot be hierarchical, the way Plato assumed, and only of equals. Its object is the best and the highest good of life possible. And Aristotle tells us categorically that slaves cannot be participant in this exercise of highest life possible in this ideal state. The highest good is felicity, he tells us, which consists in the energy and perfect practice of goodness. Now, according to Aristotle, the constitutional rule had three main elements, in fact. For our purposes, three main elements. First, it was a rule in the general or common interest of the populace, compared to a rule by a faction or a tyrant, which was in the interest of the ruler. Since it was a lawful government, the government was carried on in accordance with general regulations and not by arbitrary forces. For Aristotle, a government could not act contrary to the constitution. This is the second main element of constitutional rule. Thirdly, constitutional government meant willing subjects ruled by consent rather than by force. So constitutional government is based on consent, not force. Unlike Aristotle, Plato believes in the rule of philosopher. Here again, we are getting a different Aristotle from Plato. He is not following his mentor. Aristotle is critiquing Plato that no need to believe in the wisdom of one man, because for him, collective wisdom of the people was superior to that of the wisest ruler or legislator. The constitution for Aristotle was not only a basic law which determines the structure of its government and allocates power between different branches within the government, but it also reflects a way of life. So constitution can be seen as a way of life, Aristotle tells us. A constitution gives an identity to the polis. Polis is a city-state. It's a very general thing. That means a change in the constitution brought about a change in the polis. Why? Because constitution is giving an identity to the city-state. Since the polis is a community of citizens in a constitution, Aristotle tells us that when the constitution of the citizens changes and becomes different in kind, the polis also changes. And he asks us to compare this kind of change or transformation with a chorus, which Aristotle tells us that may at one time perform in a tragedy and at another in a comedy. So be different in kind, yet all the while be composed of the same person, Aristotle tells us. According to Aristotle, a constitution had two aspects: the ethical or the aims and goals to be pursued by a community, and secondly, the institutional or the structure of political institutions and offices and the distribution of power. For Aristotle, every constitution had to contain three elements. So what we are getting here is a love for constitution, a love for rule of law, not a love for the wisdom of philosopher rulers. In fact, Aristotle is refuting the claim that one man can be superior in terms of wisdom. So, for Aristotle, every constitution had to contain three elements: deliberative, the official or magisterium, and the judicial. Now, the deliberative had four functions, Aristotle tells us. The deliberative functions included, for any type of constitution, responsibility for the most important decisions in foreign policy, matters of war and peace, and the making and breaking of alliances. It also included the responsibility of performing tasks related to making and interpreting laws. Likewise, administration of severe penalties such as death, exile, and the fourth function included election of magistrates and their examination or completion of their term. So what we are getting from Aristotle's understanding of human nature is ideas on state, rule of law, and constitution. We see a complete picture of political philosophy which is based on empirical studies, reality of life, rather than absolute ideas or abstract ideas which we found in Plato. So Aristotle is differing from Plato in many ways when it comes to rule of law, constitution, and the purpose of the state.